And throughout that time, I saw flashes where people were interested in engagement. And I think now we're seeing it more. There's a march, there's a protest, there's an election, and people are engaged. But being in office, and Congresswoman, you can attest to this, the real work happens between the protests, between the elections. And I think what we need is more sustained involvement. People who are willing to go to a community association meeting when they'd rather be watching Real Housewives. You know, that who are willing to go to the school board meeting, not because they saw a YouTube video with kids in the classroom with coach, because that's been happening for years. But because they know that if they are not in those places, their voices will not be heard. So my hope is that this is more of a commitment than, it almost feels like a commodity. You know, like it's the hot thing right now. It needs to be more than that. And I hope this movement, you know, it's always, people shift out, you know, people settle out. And I hope, because there's so many people engaged right now, at the end of the day, there will be more people who are willing to do the work when nobody's looking, nobody's tweeting, nobody's on YouTube about it, because that's when we will really see a difference.
So, Delegate Angel, it is, speaking of doing the work in between the protests, I think that's something you can attest to firsthand. But like you're on the front lines. You were there in the States, on the ground right now doing the work. And so talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing, but also where are the gaps? Like, where are the gaps for women, especially women of color? Where are we not being plugged in at? Where are we not showing up? And how can we fill those gaps?
Absolutely. I think it's understanding where your power is and where real power lies. I work in Annapolis from January through April. And sometimes it is so frustrating because we are talking about bills that will really make a difference, that will help protect victims of domestic violence, that will help address issues with police brutality. And those hearing rooms will be empty. And sometimes it is very frustrating to me, honestly, when we see, when I hear someone saying, we're going to march on Washington, and I'm saying, you need to march to your capital. You need to march to your state house, to your school, as you said, your Board of Education meetings. Those are where real change is happening right before your eyes, and we're missing it. There's a gap there. We have bills right now dealing with protections for women of that are suffering from domestic violence. We have bills now dealing with MTA workers that are being attacked. And we'll have a hearing, and maybe 5 people show up. And it's one of those things that I keep trying to get people to understand. Change is local, politics is local, and that is where your real power lies. And we also need more women in those offices. I'm running for the Senate. I actively looked for another woman to run for my House seat, and literally we only have one in the race right now. And we have a slew of men, and I respect them, and they're great, and I support many of them. But I'm saying to ladies, like, get up. Like, we need you in there running. We need you in these rooms. And I have 5 children. So please don't tell like
you don't have a lack of things to do.
I have 5 children. I'm divorced. Listen, baby, I have no free time. But so you can do it no matter what you're facing. There are a lot of things that you can overcome, and we need you in the rooms making the laws and testifying and helping make change on the ground.
Mayor, did you want to pop in on something she said?
Yeah, and I think part of what we need to do is to be honest with ourselves about what we're willing to do and not get indignant when we see things that are wrong, when we know that we have not been in the place at the table doing the work. And I say
expand upon that. Go ahead. I think she hit her nerve. We can expand upon that.
So I'm speaking from my personal experience in elected office, serving as I started when I was 25 on the city council, went from city council president to vice president, and then mayor. I also served as secretary of the DNC, so I've been around.
Receive.
And I'm just we're speaking plainly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is a family conversation.
If we had a committee hearing in City Hall that regulated dogs, there would not be a seat available, not on the ground floor, not in the, whatever you call it, upstairs. I'm on medication, I got a cold, I don't know what you could, the gallery upstairs. It'd be full. Yeah, full. Standing room only. Something on education, something on domestic violence. So it was, you could, I mean, nobody. So to me, don't get indignant when there are policies that you don't agree with. When we're having the conversation, we are begging for people to participate and you choose not to.
Absolutely. Congresswoman, now I know.
Let me just make this statement with this. And Symone, I want to back up and I want to share with you why I made that statement there to clarify. And it was more to the young sisters because when that march happened and we had reportedly millions of people marching in Washington and New York, there weren't enough young sisters and black women out there.
You're talking about the Women's March.
The Women's March. And we were fighting for health care. And disproportionately, there are more people of color who needed the health care. When we talk about equal pay for equal work, the numbers are different for black women and Hispanic women than white women. So it is not to indict. I was honored that my neighbors and my friends who weren't of color were out there because it created a movement. But we can't sit back and complain and not be galvanized to be in the movement. And the mayor is so right about that. It's either an issue like the dogs issue or somebody has to die. Yeah. We get really emotional on TV and we come out and we want to blame the elected officials and everyone else. And then 3 days later, it's business as usual. We are not getting excited about voting. I was on the steps of the Supreme Court today because they're trying to purge votes. Yeah. They are trying in the state of Ohio, and we saw what just happened in North Carolina. They are trying to tell you that they're going to take you off the voting rolls. Now, we know what that's about, so I don't have to even answer that. But let me tell you why I'm here in addition to being with two of my great friends, and Symone said I had to be here, and we do what Symone tells us to do. I'm here because of you. And if we don't take what we're hearing seriously from women who have been in the movement at all levels, you know, when I look at Ohio, which is a major state, when we start talking about making changes, and just like Angel served in the General Assembly, became the first female, not black female, the first Democrat female to ever, in the 7th largest state, to become the House Democratic leader. And so I know what it's like to be in the fight. And so then to come to Congress and be in a fight and win and be here, we have an obligation to do more than sitting in these chairs. We have more. And so I'm counting you. There's a big march that's coming up all over the country. You know what the date is? No, you should not be silent on this. It's this month. On January the 20th. On January the 20th, they are asking us, and in a few states it's on the 21st. It is an international march of women, of sisters, of all colors coming out. Everybody needs to be out there. We are in the most critical time in our life. And it used to be, they say, well, you know, we're fighting for those who are the least of us, or we're fighting for those who fall between the cracks, or we're fighting for the sisters who are losing their government check. No, we're fighting for us. Right. Take away your health care. Take away your right to vote. You're going to be sitting in the chair today. And so that's why I'm here. I'm going to every meeting with women that I can to make sure that you are out there, that you are protesting. We're going old school, new school. You know, you can tweet it, you can Instagram it. I'm all Facebook, I'm all for all that. I do all of that. But we're going old school. You're going to get out there and march. And then you can tweet your march. And you can put it up on Facebook. But that's the only way we're going to win this victory.
So, y'all clap.
Yes.
Okay, old school. about going forward is we do the real work as women across the country and in our communities. But you have all touched on something that I want to unpack. You know, historically, the women's movement, the women's rights movement, the women's, whatever we want to call it today, has been fractured.
Yes.
We have had trouble with the true intersectional movement, intersectionality. I encourage everybody, if you don't know who Kimberly Crenshaw is, Google her. She's an African-American woman that coined the term intersectionality. And one could argue the women's movement has had an issue with intersectionality. So one, this is a critical time for us to come together and do this work, and we need to be firing on all cylinders, and we do not have the luxury to sit silently. But there's some real things we need to unpack and deal with inside the movement. So one, how can we address that while simultaneously doing the work? And then two, what real tangible things can we do to make sure that we are lifting up leaders and women, young women in the movement as well, of all walks of life, so we can have a truly inclusive movement?
I think you have to be honest about it. You know, just like you said, we have to call it what it is. I love and respect Elizabeth Warren, and I thought it was so interesting, you know, when that hashtag went in, it said, nevertheless, she persisted. And I was talking with a group of black women, and I said, you know, it's interesting because it's a new hashtag, but for us, it's an old lifestyle. Mm-hmm. We've been persisting through racism, through sexism, you know, going back to the days where we nursed, you know, one baby that wasn't ours and had to still take care of ours at the same time. And we've been doing that for families. We've been building this country and often have been forgotten. And we have to be honest about that. And then we have to use our white allies. We say allies, but I love it when the article that came out that said, we don't need allies, we need accomplices. Yes. You know, we need you to be as invested in this as I am. And for you to understand that holding me down holds you down. And that's not evident.
That's a tweetable, y'all. We don't need allies, we need accomplices. Tweet that at USO Women. And make sure y'all are getting on social media.
And at MD Delegate Angel. Don't give me my credits now, because that's what I'm giving me my credits. You know, that is one of the issues. You know, you have to acknowledge. I think a lot of times, you know, there are things that I know a white colleague can carry, and it's going to go farther. I don't mind that. But don't forget to acknowledge where you got it from.
Right.
You know, let's be honest about that. And that's what we have to do.
This whole section of the room is like we were in a meeting today. And I experienced this. Mary, you go ahead, pop in there.
So, talking about being honest and having real talk, I think the Women's March was amazing and beautiful to see. The same percentage of white women voted for Roy Moore as voted for Trump. So,
more actually. And just so we have the numbers, 65% of white women in Alabama cast their ballot not for Doug Jones.
So my issue with that is after the election, when I saw women on the television, commentators talking about how they were so proud of the Women's March and the movement that was responsible, that belied the facts of the numbers, which was black women held it down and got it done. And so I think we have to figure out a conversation, and it's clearly not a conversation that black women can lead, because we're handling our business. And every time there's a race where stakes are on the line, we show up and we vote the way to move our interests forward and to move the collective interest forward. Someone needs to lead that conversation in the white community to be honest and real about the fact that when white women show up to vote, the majority of them are voting against their own interests.
Congresswoman, how do we continue to do the work, but also have some of these real conversations that we need to have? And then secondly, how can we ensure that we are lifting up leaders from all walks of life, women of all backgrounds that are really representative of the depth and breadth of our movement in America?
Well, I certainly agree with the mayor. And while I still think that the march and the movement is important for us, because if you go back and everything is a history lesson. If you go back and you look at the Women's Suffrage Act and the march, that was white women. but there were 22 black women
Come on.
that were in the back.
Who were they with?
22.
Who were
There
they
were
with?
22 deltas.
I'm gonna give everybody their due diligence. Are there any members of Delta Sigma Theta sorority? Any ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha?
I'm only giving you a history lesson. This is not a divide. My chief is
We talk about who taught you.
When that first sorority started, there were as many deltas as AKAs there. And then there was a divide because there needed to be more public service. And some of them, now that's the real history lesson. But let me tell you the good point of this. My chief of staff is an attorney and she's in here, and she's a true blue AKA. So I'm about all women. Where's Kimberly? She's in here. Stick your hand. She's somewhere in here.
And she's from Baltimore.
And she's from Baltimore. But let me marry this history of all the Divine Nine. It takes all of us to get it.
There you go.
It's not about any one of us. And while she is so true with the statistics and what happened, so to my sisters who look more like me, we have a double obligation. We cannot be not visible in the march because people don't know outside of us that we're carrying the watch. Now, more women vote than men. But when you talk about getting your hands dirty, whether it was President Obama, whether it was Hillary Clinton, or whether it was Doug Moore in Alabama, African Americans came out and made the difference for getting us the victory. But we have that nurturing, down home way about us. And so we have to get out of that mode. We have to vote in off-year elections too. We have to make sure that every time there's an issue out there, and for every one person that's not black, we need 3 black people standing up there. Because out of sight, out of mind. The other night on the Golden Globe Awards, Oprah said that their time is up. And as much as I love that, Angela should have been our time is up. Because this is about us. And if we don't get engaged, and if we don't have millennials mentoring those who are following them, we've stopped that old school stuff. You know, I'm real clear that I stand on Shirley Chisholm's shoulder. I'm real clear about what Rosa Parks did and her sitting down in Alabama on that bus and getting arrested propelled me. But we stopped those stories. You know, we don't have the young stories, and so now we have the Symone. You know, the other day she came and brokered a deal that members of Congress didn't even want to do. And this is a young sister. So you all need to be talking about Symone.
But in that vein, listen, I love you, first of all. But, so yes, and I have some questions on here about young women, but I'm going to go off script for a second because we talk about young people kind of up here in this very feathery, happy place, but not y'all, but there's some people that y'all know. They run into and encounter young people every day, and they haven't pulled a young person in to be their mentor. They won't put a young person on their committee or their board. They won't ask a young person to participate in the planning and implementation. They just want them to show up and and stand at the door. And so there's some real conversations to be had about women truly mentoring and pulling in other women. I mean, I'll take it a step further than a personal story. I know that when I first got my job on the campaign trail, there were a number of established women in politics that literally, like, there was an email going around asking if I was a real black girl.
Well,
Okay?
you are from Nebraska.
Well, and so was Malcolm X, okay? Malcolm X is also from Nebraska, okay? Malcolm X is going on. So I say that to say, but then there were women, like the women sitting right up here, folks like Desiree Peterkin-Bell, people like Wakenya, who was formerly with Nobel, now who's over at the DNC, who pulled me in and had my back. But not enough women pulled me in and had my back. I had to scratch and claw and do some other stuff. And then on the back end, when I was the only sister left sitting up there on television, everybody's like, oh, that's our girl. If we could just talk about that, because that's real. And that's something I'm telling you, that's something I experienced. And if I'm feeling it at this level, but I still have to push through. Think about the young women who are in offices and who are working on committees and in places and spaces where they do not feel the support to push through and take it to the next level.
Well, we have to tell. That's what our story is about. It's called accountability. When you look at that, we have almost 50 members in Congress of the Congressional Black Caucus. I believe, so I'm speaking for myself, I believe every one of the sisters ought to have a sister for their chief of staff. Because if we don't hire you to be the chief of staff, then how can we expect other people? And so it's not because we've been elected for most of our lives, but we have legal counsel, we have researchers, we have communication folks. We have to make sure. I got a young sister right here. Stand up, Carissa. She's my press secretary. All the 20-some years ago. Because if we don't give us an opportunity, how do you expect other people? So it starts with us being accountable and you holding us accountable. Now, we don't have to be at odds. See, sometimes we think that it's only hot or cold. Well, that doesn't work because there's still so few of us that's there that we're fighting to protect our being there. So we have to figure out how to get on the same page. And then we have to say to the young Carissas, you got to go find 5 more people like you. Because we also don't have a lot of us willing to come early and stay late.
Delegate, you want to pop in on that real quick? Because we are going to take some crowd questions, ladies and gents.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because I fall in a good middle ground. Because this is good melanin, I'm much older than I look. and I actually used to sit at the table with Dr. Dorothy Height. And that was
You're not that old.
Yeah, maybe I'll be 40 in 2 years. Oh, wow. which is still baby.
I have children older than her.
which is still very young. So I'm not. I know it's gonna be like. So I'm still very, but I'm in the middle. I'm definitely not, because people think I'm 20 something with you. It is not the same thing. But
you're not right, Stephanie.
But the funny thing is, so I hear, because sometimes I'm identified with a younger group than I am. And I've been raised by women that are in certain positions. And it's an interesting divide that we have. And sometimes it's about, Congresswoman is one of, like, you take those steps and make those, and purposefully put women in those positions. And it's a matter of how do we begin to have the conversation where, you're talking to folks who are at your level and, who are leading organizations. We have organizations that, have been around for a long time, and the same folks are there. And then when a young sister tries to come, you'll see oftentimes they're there, and then they're gone. They're there, and then they're gone. That's a problem. And that's something that we have to have those conversations. And you and I can't necessarily have those conversations, because as much as I love, my ladies that train me, whenever I go anywhere, I don't care what office I'll be the President of the United States. When I walk in that office, I know I'm an intern. And that's okay, because I serve them because they trained and taught me. But there are certain things that they're not going to hear from me. And I think it's important. And then we have to have conversations about how do we work together to come to them and respectfully say, we want to sit at this table. We want to be able to tell you how we're feeling and to have a say in what's happening in these organizations and in these offices.
That's why we have the United States of Women. Yes, really quickly, and then we're going to go to the crowd.
I'll try to make it as quick as possible. First off, I always have your back. I stay locked and loaded.
She does. She will text me and be like, do we need to go? No, stand down. Stand down.
But in saying that, to value women when they get in these positions and be willing to have real talk. Because too often we'll have a woman who reaches a position and then you'll have 3 other women that want to come for her. And then what happens? What happens? The vote's divided, and a lot of times you'll end up with somebody who's, that has a Y chromosome in that position, when it was an opportunity for us to show solidarity as women. So to me it's about willing to have those real conversations, and I loved every minute, even the rough times of my time in public office. But the thing I enjoy the most about not being in elected office is being able to be real frank with people when they want to talk to me about running for office. Because when I know that there's somebody, even if I don't support that person, but if there's somebody that is in that position, that is working hard, that's capable, that's responsive and doing a good job, and somebody, for me, I've never had personal ambition. I always had ambition for my city. I wanted to serve my city. I didn't put my personal ambition above anything else. When you come in, you talk about, I just want to run for office, and there's somebody there who your personal ambition puts in jeopardy, somebody who might have a committee seat, might, have a leadership role. You have to have, somebody has to be willing to have a real conversation. And I'm certainly willing to have those real conversations with people and saying, what for? What are you bringing to the table that's not already there? And if on the other side of the aisle is someone who could possibly win, if we don't straighten our stuff out on our side, then you must support this person on the other side, because all you're doing is causing contention and weakening our ability to win in November.
Gems, y'all, gems. Okay, we're going to take some crowd questions. Remind you, questions, not soliloquies. Okay?
Right over here.
What's your name?
My name is Claudia Bellany Atanga, and ladies, of course, you're amazing, beautiful, empowering, inspiring. And I'll be honest, Jordan Brooks, we got to give it up for her. She inspired me to really ask this question. Jordan? And she told me that other women may be able to relate to this, but I'm the first African-American woman who's gotten a designation in economic research through CCR. And I'm the second woman in Maryland I'm the second person in Maryland who's gotten the award, and I'm the first African-American woman. And I was on the front page of the paper for this award, and then that same day, I got put on administrative leave, and I've been told now, just recently, that I'm being they want to terminate me because I have an agenda, and because I have own objectives, and that I spoke too much about being a Black woman. And my boss is after. I'm not going to tell anyone. Those who know, I know some of you know that I got this award, so please don't tell my company, but it is a government entity. And I was told, don't talk about being a Black woman. It minimizes this accomplishment as being the first as the first person. They said, don't talk about that, it's irrelevant. And so I want to ask you all, how would you handle this situation? And how can we empower other women? Because you all sit here and talk about, pulling together, supporting each other. How would you handle the situation of being terminated because you have your own agenda and because you are being insubordinate and you're talking too much about being a Black woman? And they said what I said was controversial.
Thank you for asking the question, posing it. Okay, Pam.
Well, I think that's when you need accomplices,
right.
And accomplices that don't necessarily look like you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's when we have to hold our sisters accountable for standing up for us the way we stand up for others. And I would, of course you'll get legal counsel, but I'm saying that you definitely need to gather your circle of support to speak on your behalf, because it needs to, your support needs to be broad and diverse.
And I am so transparent and traditionally unfiltered. I was probably a young you. Because, and I'm a little older, so for me to deny my Blackness and who I am is unthinkable for me. As a matter of fact, I try to count the number of times that I say black or African American when I'm in a room with non-African. Because I think it's important, you know, when you say you don't see color, and you know, come on, you look at me, you know I'm a soul. You hear me. So to you, I think that's the best answer we can give you. You have to go get the accomplices. You have to, there are a lot of organizations. Absolutely. People have been fired and incarcerated for things far greater than what you said. And it's been, whether it's been the NAACP Defense Fund, whether it's been the Urban League, whether it's been the NAACP or the Divine Nine or any of these other organizations that take on women's issues. You know, obviously you're a bad sister. Tell your story. You know, for you to back up now makes it seem like it was more than, I mean, it's unbelievable. And yet I know it to be true because I've lived long enough. For you saying that you're black and you've earned something and you're proud and you're sharing it for the younger sisters, keep telling your story.
Absolutely. And you know, I mean, I'm an attorney. I'm a New York litigator, so I'll sue a paper bag for being brown. You need to definitely get legal counsel.
Yes.
But also, one of the things, I grew up in Indiana. So South
Shout out to the Midwest.
Shout out to the Midwest.
Shout out to the Midwest. Midwest ladies.
Shout out to sometimes you're the raisin in the milk. And so, and I've learned to be unapologetically black. And so you walk in that, you know, and they will try and shrink you down. And in political spaces, you know, Stephanie is free now, and it's a beautiful thing. I look at her sometimes, I'm like, wow. but it sometimes it makes you want to shrink back, and so you always have to stiffen yourself and realize that you stand on the shoulders of giants and be unapologetically black. They won't like you at times. They'd be all right.
And they won't like you at times if you're quiet either. So you have to, whatever your occupation is, you know, you have to be, you know, I have grandchildren and they're little and they're brilliant. So, you know, I have this thing, I'm not going to let 2 4-year-olds be smarter than me. But it's a big challenge. So just like when you're with adults, you have to use words like, to let people know what's coming. So I always will tell you, you know, I'm very transparent.
Yes.
So that allows me to say anything I want to say.
My favorite one is, I just want to be very clear. To be clear.
And then nobody challenges you because you're doing it so nicely up front. You know, I believe in accountable. So when you mess up, I'm coming after you. Because that's what accountability is.
We will take another crowd question. As we're coming to the crowd, I'd like to know, Congresswoman Beatty is also the person that came to the convention in a very banging dress. Y'all might have seen somewhere else.
You can't be afraid to take a risk.
What is your question?
So I grew up liberal in a very conservative Florida, and I've lived up here for 11 years. And after the election in November 2016, I was very admonished and shocked and very dismayed and was depressed, just like many people in this room probably were. And I immediately tried reaching out to all of the white women who grew up in my neighborhood that voted for Trump. And the one thing that I found out was they were one-issue voters. And how can we rebrand pro-choice to be pro-life for women and children?
That's a great question. So the question is, just so everybody heard, how can we rebrand what did you say, pro-life? Pro-choice to be like pro-life and women voters? It's a heavy question. Well, I'll kick it off. How about this? I think that we have totally, we have allowed the issue of being pro-choice to not just be about our bodily autonomy as women. We have allowed that to be boiled down, and not us, because it's the men that have boiled this down, boiled down specifically to the issue of abortion.
Right.
And abortion is a very personal thing. That, you know, people differ for various reasons, whether it's their religious beliefs or, you know, whatever's happening with them personally. But I think we need to broaden the conversations when we talk about being pro-choice. That we're not just talking about abortion. We're talking about the bodily autonomy of women. Who wants to be told what to do? Right. And furthermore, we're not out here regulating penises, so I don't understand why my uterus and vagina is such a topic of conversation.
There's another also very basic thing that in going to when you're talking about national politics, part of what we don't disarm people and understand and make them understand is that is a local and state issue. there isn't that much outside of Supreme Court justices that your president is going to do to regulate abortion. Like, there's just not. It's a red herring. And part of how you begin to educate people is to make them understand that. And this isn't about, because that's what the Republicans have been very much able to do. And we, as in both sides, we don't educate people on the fact that when you're talking about what your president is going to do, they're not regulating abortion laws. So this isn't necessarily an issue that you should be deciding your presidential race on. But that's about making people understand government and politics. But it takes the wind out of the sails of some of the folks that are running on that for offices that don't decide those issues. And so that's how you also begin to make them understand that's their one issue, to say, what can he do for you? What does his belief help for that issue? And when they begin to understand nothing, then let's talk about all these other things that you don't agree with that he's going to try and do to you.
Anybody else want to chime in on this?
I just want to add that I think we have to change the conversation of the definition of it. And we have to get out front, because what they do, they've made it all about abortion, whether it is the trucks and the pictures and everything. So we find ourselves running from it and then trying to defend why it's not abortion versus defining it through Planned Parenthood or family planning or my body. But we need something that's concrete, and we need to start the conversation first. So, because what happens, they get out front to make us defend something that many people who are pro-choice are anti-abortion. But they want it to be their decision, because I had a person that came to me, a Republican, everything was about abortion, and I said to him, what would happen if you had a 12-year-old child and she got raped by a crackhead African-American man? What would you do? And he said, I didn't know. There was another man standing there and called me later and said, my daughter is pregnant and she's 15. Can you help me get her an abortion? So you never know what you'll do until you're in that situation. But we need to tell the stories early and not, it's like you can't run from who you are. And you can't run from what you believe in, but we don't define it well enough. So we find ourselves defending something that's not even defined by us. You're going to lose every time on that.
Every time. We're going to take one more crowd question, and I'm going to have final comments from the panel. Where's our... All right.
Hi. So, ladies, if you could convince me of two things. One, convince me to remain a Democrat, because I hear the party leadership talk about working class white people one more time, I'm going to throw up, because we all work. And two, if you can convince me to continue to support NAACP in Urban League, because in the NAACP just appointed another director, and it's a man. We have been supporting that organization since its inception, and they can't seem to find a woman to run it. Same with the Urban League. So good. Convince me to stay and support both organizations.
Well, y'all in the hot seat. Wow. Why should folks in this room, if they subscribe to politics of the left or progressivism, if they would like to subscribe to a political party, you see, I'm trying to give the loophole for the people. If they would like to subscribe to a political party, why should they be Democrats? I would venture to say everyone on this panel is a Democrat. I am a Democrat.
Well, let me start it, and you all help me out with this. First of all, to be transparent, I am a life member of the NAACP and the Urban League. I was the first black woman to chair the Urban League Columbus, Ohio's Urban League Board. Now, I think you can't affect change unless you're not inside the game. Too many African American people don't pay their dues and don't join the NAACP. If I asked how many people here are lifetime members of both, everybody's hand should go up. Now, I agree with you, but I'm old enough to remember when women did run the NAACP, when Miley Evers, we can go back when there were women at the forefront. Good friends with Dorothy Heighton when they were doing the National Council of Negro Women. They were the impetus behind the movement with the Urban League. And then you know what happened? We got old. And there was our fault and your fault, those that fall under me, didn't continue it. You know, when we look to 30 and 40-year-olds now, they don't go to the National Urban League unless they're an elected official. Or, you know, they don't get engaged with the NAACP. They don't put $50 in an envelope to the National Defense Fund, which has helped save so many sisters that have been in trouble. What was the young girl, Kimbra, the young sister? Kimbra Smith. But for the NAACP, the Urban League, the Links, the AKs, the Deltas, and the National Defense Fund, that young sister would have been on a life sentence, would have still been there. So my thing is, it goes back old school. We have to say that. We have to show up at the conventions. We have to fill out the forms that we want to change. We have to get going local. How many people serve on the local boards? There are more women engaged now in politics and voting and working than ever before, but fewer of us are getting our hands dirty in the community work. Because now we're taught, well, if I don't have the corner office, you know, I'm not going out there to the chicken fry and the fish fry and with the little kids and mentoring. So we have to do a better job. It goes back to everything, in my opinion, that Angel said. The people get old, and you still the intern, whether you're a lawyer or a mayor. If you're under 50, you know, when I was coming up until you got 50, you didn't get to sit at the table because they said you were too young. Well, that's the craziest thing in the world. And so I think we have to do a better job of engagement. It's at the local level. You have to change it at the local level. You have to run for office, and not necessarily political office. You have to say, I want to change it, and I want to get on the board, and I want to run and get on the national board. We are begging for people to get engaged because I feel your pain with it. And I think to be a Democrat, look at the alternative that you would have now. When you talk about women and women of color, when you talk about Hispanics and Asian women, when you talk about equal pay for equal work, when you talk about all the social issues, good, bad, or indifferent as we may be, it is a better option than being on the other side and voting for what this country is dealing with right now.
Stephanie, as someone who is a former officer of the Democratic National Committee and somebody who gavelled in the convention.
Who asked the question? Where did you go?
Sister right there.
Okay, got it. So I can't, while I cannot convince you, really because I don't really want to, because you got to make your own choice. What I will say is I agree with the Congresswoman. Think about your alternatives, and as effective or ineffective as you think the Urban League or the NAACP is, where is the alternative organization? So if we know that's what we have, and that has structure, a foundation, and a history, I think it behooves us who want to see different to make it different, and to hold these organizations accountable to what our priorities are. And unless we are engaged, we cannot expect for them to reflect our interests and our priorities. And it's the exact same way with the Democratic Party. I get frustrated when I think about how black women have held down the Democratic Party for decades, and yet you look at the leadership of the Democratic Party, and you would think that I'm not going to be pejorative, so you would think that that was not the case, right? Because there's one African American woman. Now, I will say that in some of it, at some point, we have to own that. Because when I sought re-election as secretary, some of the harshest feedback, criticism, and comments I got were from other black women.
There you go.
Absolutely. And what I saw was the LGBTQ coalition stuck together without question. The Latino caucus stuck together without question. What is the coalition? The Asian coalition stuck together without question. The Black caucus, we had to start trying to convince people. We had to try to get a call back from, I'm just being very honest and clear. And there was not even the notion of coming together as a black caucus to support candidates was foreign. It was not even something that was being considered when every other caucus, and you can see in the leadership of the organization now, the caucuses, the groups, the affinity groups that decided it was more important for them to have representation than it wasn't about the person, it was about having their interests represented. And it is very clearly represented which coalition stuck together when you look at the organization. And we have to take ownership of that because we did that. We made those decisions.
And to be clear, it depends, once again, going back to, it depends on where you are. Being a Democrat, you know, if you are in a state where there are a closed primary and it's largely led by Democrats, then your election isn't in November. Your election is the primary. And unless you are a registered for those particular parties, you have no say. And some people don't even realize that. They show up to the polls and they want to vote for someone. It's like, you're not on the roll. You're not registered as something. So that's one reason why it just matters, so that you can make those decisions. The other thing is, just as Congresswoman Beatty said and Mayor Rawlings-Blake said, you have to be at the table. And we need you at the table. And to do that, you need to be in your local, you know, the Democratic Party is broken down into down to central committees. So, you know, if you don't like something, I always encourage you, you know, get on the central committee. Be the one that's, you know, there's always one that's like, you know, that's always kind of rallying against what everyone's rallying against the flow, but sometimes that's necessary. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, not just talking about what's the alternative, but how can you be effective? I'm effective from inside the system. You know, I come from national politics. You know, I made a choice to be in the state political realm because I decided I need to make these changes and I need to do it from within. And that's what we as women need to do. It's what we as black women need to do. We can take apart this system by having seats at the table.
And let me give you one quick thing.
Okay, because I'm going to have to wrap it now.
Let me give you one quick thing that's a good resolve, and it's tangible. So when we see things that are up, whether it is looking for a new president of the NAACP, we need to submit names. When we have judicial seats up in their appointments, we need to submit names. And when somebody falters, don't hold them down. When sisters make mistakes, whether it's the DNC, and they're there and the media starts talking about this sister did this, and this sister gave the questions out, and this sister, now you were riding high 5 years. And then you have a falter, people don't write your letters, people don't say, how are you anymore? So be a little more forgiving when sisters get out there on the edge and you want to stand in line and get their autograph, and 5 years later, people talking about it. Right. Be real careful about it.
Well, you know what? On that note, y'all better give this panel a round of applause. Angela Angel. Where can we find y'all on social media? Really quick, give me your social media handles. Where can we find you, Congresswoman? What's your Twitter handle?
Rep Beatty at
Rep Beatty on Twitter and Rep Beatty on Instagram.
At Rep Beatty. Where can we find you, Mayor?
Mayor SRB on Twitter and Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, all one word, on Instagram.
All right, and Delegate Angela Angel. Where can we find you?
MD for Maryland Advocate Angel. So Advocate Angel, MD Advocate Angel.
Perfect. And I am at Symone D. Sanders, Symone with the YD is in dynamic. Thank you. Y'all give a warm